I spent the last week listening to the Supergirl soundtrack, trying to figure out how the score works within the film itself. Because when a major summer blockbuster swaps through 3 different composers, all within the span of 4 months, it's easy to assume that the film went through some sort of identity crisis, right? We started with Ramin Djawadi back in December, then he was replaced by Junkie XL or Tom Holkenborg in February, and then in March, Claudia Sarne was announced as the official composer. So most people might question if the filmmakers maybe lost track of the vision, the musical tone of the film, or is there a specific reason why Claudia's style was exactly what the film needed? So let's take a listen to the Supergirl main theme so we can get an idea of how Claudia approached Kara's character. Now, this is actually from the Supergirl suite, and funny enough, in an interview with the Film Music Institute, Claudia actually mentions how the title, the suite in the name, is just a way to differentiate this track from the actual cues that belong to the score, because this, in all honesty, isn't really a suite. Normally, we might get a suite of themes from across the movie, and it usually plays at the end credits.
Calling it the suite was, at the time, it was just sort of differentiating between that and another sort of action piece later on. If it was going to be a real suite, I would have included Argo on it.
But instead here, it's more of a way to present general ideas of Kara's themes, maybe some textures, all as a standalone single. And I have to say, it really did get stuck in my head. Now, before we talk about what the theme does for the story, I do want to give fair warning. The rest of this video is likely going to contain spoilers for Supergirl. All right, so let's see what it's actually doing. The theme itself is pretty simple. So it kind of starts with like this pickup between B and C, and if we're in the key of A minor, that's going to be our second and our third. And this right here helps build anticipation because we're kind of starting on that G, we're waiting to go somewhere, and then we go up and resolve to the A. And a little bit of suspension there with the A clashing with the G and resolving to the A again. But I love that that main motif, that little, is almost separate. In a way, that's kind of like the main theme, like that's the motif, while this is just a way to build that anticipation. In a way, it's almost flipped. We start with that anticipation, and then the second half of the melody kind of has that. Then on the repeat, and that F sharp is gonna bring us outside of the key. So normally in A minor, A natural minor, we're going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, using that F natural. But here we are going to what's called A Dorian, and that's gonna give us a raised sixth, or depending on how you look at it. For me, I saw this as a minor key, so it really just is a raised sixth. But technically, if you were looking at this from the quality of a major perspective, you're really getting a lowered third and a lowered seventh. So and that raised six is exactly what gives us that heroic, that bright, unexpected color. So if we're just looking at the chord progression, so while that alternating phrase is happening, that we go E, that's kind of giving us that A minor quality. Then we drop down to the G again. And then we drop down to the D major. The G is giving us a little bit of attention and release as we resolve down to the F sharp. So that's how we know we're in D major. And then we drop down to the C. And then we get that alternating phrase again. Then we jump up to the G. And now we kind of move a little bit back down to the D. But the melody now jumps up and gives us just a downward phrase. So Oh, and this is my favorite part because now we go to an F major. Before we were using A Dorian, but here we're going from that D major. And it gives us this lifting feeling, right? Very heroic. And that is probably my favorite part about this entire theme, because this is basically just a major 6, a major 7, and back to our tonic, the A minor. And we've heard variations of this in something like Dearly Beloved from the Kingdom Hearts video game series. Then we've also seen this in something very heroic in Alan Silvestri's Avengers main theme. And then we also hear a variation of this in Interstellar. And this, I will admit, is a little bit different than what we've heard because this is kind of caught in a cyclical nature, but it does follow that just major, major, minor. It gives us a sense of resolution, of us finally getting back to our home base, but it avoids that just classic sound of a 5/1 cadence, something you hear all the time in music. And I really love how Claudia uses like these aggressive synths so that it creates this hybrid orchestration sound, you know? There's almost this blend between like female vocals on the melody along with the lead synth, and it creates such a distinct sound. Like I really do hear Kara's personality shine throughout this entire theme. It's like she's embracing herself as a different version of a hero, something that's different than Superman. So if you've ever struggled with your own music, maybe you just keep staring at a blank session, a blank page, right? You're trying to spark these new kinds of motifs, a chord progression that feels unique enough, then definitely check out my Film Composer's Recipe Book. It's a collection of simple, actionable musical blueprints that are designed to just share the core ingredients behind different genres and styles of cinematic music. This way you can just sit down and start writing. So if you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description down below. Now, a suite of ideas, a theme on its own, is one thing, but I am more interested in seeing how it's layered throughout the film. How does it support the context of the story? And I feel like so much of this score in particular has a gritty, aggressive synth edge, but at the same time, Claudia composes with a lot of intimacy as well. So let's actually take the track Krypton Destroyed as an example. So we'll stop real quick there because that alone, Claudia uses the piano to create this soft, elegant, but like dramatic kind of sound. The piano, it's in its upper register, it's light and airy, but there's something almost brewing underneath. And in different interviews and stuff, Claudia has mentioned that she uses the piano to represent Kara's pain, grief, her isolation. We hear it in this track. We hear it in another one called Silent Scream. We even hear it at the very beginning of the Supergirl suite. But here, the piano is used for this chaotic arpeggio, that do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. It's subdued, but it creates a sense of tension, like, yeah, this is a warning for something to come. Now, if you know anything about Superman, or if you've read the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow storyline, which this film is loosely based on, then you know that the planet Krypton is destroyed, as the title suggests. Kal-El is sent off to Earth as a baby, becomes Superman, and as the planet gets destroyed, a small chunk gets separated, it's enclosed, so that a small population can survive. This is known as Argo City. It's where Kara grows up as one of the remaining few survivors of Krypton. And just listen to how the track evolves from that piano into something bigger. It's so dramatic. And what I love is that for a lot of the Krypton stuff, the Argo City stuff, she keeps the textures light. You know, it's orchestral. It feels very orchestral, but it's dramatic. The timpani coming in, the strings take over that piano arpeggio with those ostinatos. It becomes grand and epic in scale with the use of the swells in the choir and the brass sustains. We go from that tense, intimate piano to something that feels apocalyptic because it really is. The planet is being destroyed. And just as a side note, if you are a composer and you're looking to add scale to your music, choir. Choir is fantastic for that. Now let's take a listen to another example of how Claudia goes from a massive sound to something more fragile, but it's equally as devastating. The first of which is the Argo Part 1 track. Here she's using padded strings, more atmospheric, ethereal sounds, but she also introduces that solo cello line in its upper register, and it just gives you that lyricism, that heartbreaking sound, honestly, as we find out more of Kara's backstory as she grows up in Argo City. But the thing is, over time, that separation of Argo City from Krypton, it exposed kryptonite in the ground, which ultimately is poisoning the rest of the Kryptonian population. And so Kara has to watch her people die slowly, painfully, including her mother, and she has to see her father get progressively more sick from the poison as well. And this is where the track Argo Part 2 plays as her father sends Kara off to Earth to join Kal-El, right? We see her shot out into space as pretty much the rest of Argo City falls to the kryptonite. And honestly, Argo Part 2 might be my favorite track of the entire album. Because throughout the film, we get little hints here and there of Kara's theme, but this is the first time we get a variation of it that is just truly devastating. So instead of the A Dorian that we heard in the suite version of the theme, we now kind of shift over to F minor, we transpose, and that original A, we're now shifting gears, we're shifting that tonal center to revolve around F. So F minor, and normally we would go down to. So even though we're using different notes, we are getting the same kind of quality from the progression. But in Argo Part 2, Claudia shifts the progression around to make the melody feel even more heartbreaking. So instead of going down to that B flat major chord, right, the melody would go. We're starting with F minor, the 1. We're going down to E flat major. And then we're going to the major 6 in F minor. Oh, it's such a beautiful sound. And something as simple as changing that heroic raised 6th. So that would be the raised 6. That would be the natural, what's naturally in the key of F minor. It just sounds sweeping. It sounds elegant. It sounds a little bit mournful. And I just love the orchestration here because, again, you know, Krypton, Argo City, it's this location that intentionally is meant to feel more orchestral, lighter in texture, especially in this little clip. It's a lot more focus on strings, right? A lot more focus on doubling the string melody in octaves to give it that big sweeping sound. And then we heard as the melody continued, we get the brass, we get the choir again to give it that weight and gravity of the situation. And all of these bits and pieces of Kara's theme and the different textures that Claudia intentionally introduces, it all builds to the third act when we finally hear Supergirl's theme in full with the track Supergirl. This is what plays when Kara finally puts on her classic Supergirl outfit. She's embracing the Supergirl title, and she's actively choosing to be her own version of a hero. That raised sixth. To me, this is the big moment when the theme can just finally feel fleshed out. Those brass staccatos feel exciting. The percussion here is very energetic. You kind of hear it in the Supergirl suite, but I like that specifically in this track, we get a more pronounced version of it. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the percussion from the Thunderbolt score. But my absolute favorite little detail is the bass line in the piano. This is the exact same instrument that represented Kara's isolation, her trauma, all throughout the first 2/3 of the movie. But now it's being used to aggressively drive her heroic theme forward. Within the context of the story, her past isn't being ignored, right? We're still using the piano, but we're now using it in a way that is the foundation of her triumph. Again, Claudia had 5 weeks to really get the full score ready to go before the recording session started. And that is enough time to just sit down, write music, but she even acknowledges it herself that it's not enough time to second guess every musical decision. And this is something that I talk about with students, especially when they ask about finding inspiration, what happens if inspiration doesn't hit. But two of my favorite quotes, Duke Ellington once said, "I don't need more time, what I need is a deadline." And Leonard Bernstein said, "To achieve great things, two things are needed, a plan and not quite enough time." And I love this because sometimes time is not always the determining factor for quality. A lot of great music is usually done with some constraint. And when a project jumps from Ramin Djawadi in December to Junkie XL in February to eventually Claudia in March, the immediate assumption is that maybe the studio started to panic. Maybe they didn't have a direction for the music, or maybe they just didn't know what they wanted. But look at the composers that they brought in from the start, right? From Game of Thrones, Westworld, House of the Dragon, Iron Man. Ramin Djawadi has a background in both orchestral and electronic music. Tom Hulkenborg is known for his hyper-aggressive, maximalist, kind of industrial synth and drum production. He's worked on Mad Max, Batman v Superman, Justice League, Rebel Moon. But the thing is, if you bring in just this heavy industrial wall-to-wall sound kind of score, I do think it's easier to lose the humanity of the story. Even though Supergirl is a lot more action-oriented, definitely grittier, aggressive, especially in comparison to Superman, it's still a story of grief. The grief of a girl who watched her entire planet slowly be poisoned to death. So my guess is that, one, it could be as simple as scheduling issues, right? Maybe Ramin, he was working on House of the Dragon season 3 at this point, so maybe there was something going on there. It could also just be that one composer's style went too far in one extreme. And the thing is, Claudia spent years writing for films and shows that call for the more intimate, dramatic moments, but also balanced out with industrial electronic textures. She started her career as a singer-songwriter in the rock duo 12 Rounds, but she's also worked on projects like the Yogurt Shop Murders docuseries, The Book of Eli with her husband Atticus Ross, Shining Girls from Apple TV, and Supergirl is just messy. She's got baggage to her. She is drinking away her pain. But the film makes it a point to really drive home that she is also good. There is nuance to her character. And that's why I think Claudia's specific background made her a good fit for this role. And of course, we do have to talk about the significance of this moment in the industry, because Claudia is the first woman to ever compose for a live-action DC Universe feature film. This is such a male-dominated field, especially when it comes to big action blockbusters. So this movie does add her to a small group of women composers who have been able to break through into this tier of superhero filmmaking, right? Shirley Walker did Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. Pinar Toprak scored Captain Marvel. Laura Karpman did The Marvels and Captain America Brave New World, and Hildur Gudnadottir did both Jokers. Of course, even Claudia mentions in some interviews, because this is a topic of conversation that comes up, that she doesn't want to just be hired because of her gender, but she wants to be hired because she actually has the musical capability to score the film. But she also mentions that during the recording sessions, another female orchestral musician went up to her and just kind of thanked her for being there, for leading the moment. And I think that advocacy for the visibility of women composers is just really important. So having a voice this unique, now part of a major franchise, is just a breath of fresh air for the industry. And I do want to clarify, I would have been excited for the composer's score, regardless of who took on the role, because they each have something unique and different that they could bring. But looking at Hulkenborg in particular, I think I just prefer Claudia's sound over another DC film that might have felt like more of the same crossing over from the DC EU. So this all leads to the question, did the score for Supergirl actually work? And for me, absolutely. Clearly, James Gunn, Craig Gillespie, they heard something in Claudia's music and her thematic ideas that made them trust her as the composer for this film. But ultimately, I think she just understands Kara's character. And the idea that going through 3 composers means that the film just didn't know the tone it was looking for, that feels backwards to me. I think they knew exactly the sound they were looking for, and it just kind of reaffirms that Claudia's style was the best fit. Now, for the film itself, I am not saying that this is my favorite superhero film. I'm not saying that this is perfect by any means. And honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of electronic-based scores. My interests usually lean more towards orchestral, so John Williams, Michael Giacchino, John Powell. But Claudia added such a variety to the Supergirl score. From tracks that we didn't even get a chance to talk about in this video, like Lobo's theme, Krem's theme, even Ruthie's, to the more emotional palette that we hear in Krypton Destroyed or those Argo tracks. So as a whole, there were so many elements to the score that I absolutely adored. But let me know what you thought of the Supergirl score in the comments below. Of course, just keep it civil. I know that this film is very divisive among fans. And if you want to see how 3 notes from John Williams' Superman theme create the foundation of 2025 Superman score, then definitely check out this video next. I'll see you over there, and as always, happy composing.